Now, let's go to our final speaker, who is against the motion. She is the assistant editor at the online magazine Spiked. She writes there about feminism, free speech, and, crucially for our purposes, the generational divide. She's also the author of What Women Want: Fun, Freedom, and an End to Feminism. She played a part in the Invoke Article 50 Now campaign, which did focus particularly on younger people. So please welcome, speaking against the motion that the young today have been betrayed by the older generations, Ella Whelan.
Thank you. I think I'm the youngest member of the panel, but I'm going to go against the given wisdom that all young people hate their elders. I'm here to give the radical idea and the radical argument that actually the generation debate and the war between the generations does nobody any good. When I was thinking about how the younger generation, my generation, are characterized as, George said, often as sort of whingy or lazy, I remembered the words that my mother used to, my sometimes dramatic mother used to say to me whenever I was an ungrateful teenager, as we all have been at some point. She used to quote King Lear to me and say, how sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless child. And I think that this sort of is very important to think about in relation to the motion. I think that we are in danger of portraying or playing to the idea that my generation are whingers. Generation whinge is one of my favorite phrases. They're kind of a biting, ungrateful, thankless child. And truly, this generation debate is turning quite ugly. I've been shocked over the last 5 years, more crucially since Brexit, the last year and a half, at the kind of deeply ugly nature of the generation wars. You have endless debates on television with someone around my age in their 20s and somebody in their 50s, and it can get extremely ugly. There's this kind of sense of entitlement that I think is given to my generation. There's this kind of get out of jail free pass. Of course you have a right to slag off your elders because life is so terrible for you. And we've seen that, Esther has mentioned, we've seen that in relation to the kind of debate about bed blockers, this truly dystopian and disgusting idea that we should be kicking old people out of the hospital as soon as they get in there because they're taking up space. Kind of popular discussions about environmentalism today, about overpopulation, often have the finger pointed at our elders, that there's simply too many of them taking up space in the world. There's also discussions about people being greedy in relation to their pensions, old people, as was mentioned before, taking up too much space in their old homes, that we should kind of ship everyone off to state-provided care homes and leave them from take them brutally from their family homes. There's a terrible amount of kind of ugly discussion and granny bashing, really, I think, that gets a kind of free pass. And myself and a lot of young people aren't very happy about that. I don't think that represents our wishes. And of course, the key thing that's happened in the last year and a half or so, since 2016, that has really pushed the generation wars to its utter extreme, is the Brexit vote. I voted for Brexit. I think it was one of the best things that's ever happened in British history. It was certainly the biggest political mandate in British history, and as has been discussed, there has been a great discussion about older people screwing over the young in their vote for Brexit. And talk about ugly ageism. Some of the things that were said, I spend a lot of my time on Twitter as a journalist, some of the things that have been said on Twitter about old people have been truly disgusting. People talking about can't wait until all the old people kick the bucket so that we can have another rerun of the referendum and this time win it with young people. So I've said a very bleak picture, but I think that actually this debate, we've had a very cordial discussion so far, does tend to get quite nasty. And is it based on reality? I mean, are we, as my generation, worse off than my parents' generation, the generation before them? No, absolutely not. And I've got some nice stats that my editor, Brendan O'Neill, found out for an article he wrote for Spiked a while back. I'll just tell you them because I was shocked by some of them, and I'm pleasantly shocked that in the 1960s, And 5% of 18-year-olds went to university. So, challenging the idea that free university meant that everybody was suddenly lining up to go. No, 5%. Today it's 43%. We're having kind of discussions today and debates about actually the consequences of so many young people going to university and whether it's worthwhile. So that is definitely something that my generation has on the previous. In the early 70s, 28% of 17-year-olds were in school. Today it's 75%. There you go, that's pretty good. In the early 20th century, 77% of people rented, not owned, and by 1971 that was about 50%. Today it's around 36%. There's another myth busted about renting and house prices. In the mid-70s, is one of my favorites actually, there was about 5.1 hours of housework done by the average family, mainly women. Today that's closer to 3, down to the technological advances and not having to push around, as my granny did, the Hoover on wheels. In 1951, 20% of homes in Britain had no running water. In 1961, 22% of households didn't have a hot tap. So I'm afraid the idea that the baby boomer generation had it plain sailing simply doesn't hold up. It's actually not the case that they were better off than my generation. Certainly, people of my age, there's kind of the joke in the blurb to the debate today was about my generation enjoying smashed avocado on toast and going out to dinner all the time. I can tell you that's pretty true, actually. I challenge you to find one young person out on the street who doesn't know what brunch is or hasn't had it at least once a week for the majority of their teens. Jokes aside, we've grown up with the internet, we've got smartphones in our hands. A lot of young people today have cleaners. A lot of students have cleaners, employed cleaners. That is sort of an astonishing fact and an expression of wealth. We go to university, we go out to the cinema often, we go out to eat often. All these things that are, positive, fantastic advancements, the growth of wealth, the access to more of society's resources. These are all, as I see it, extremely positive things. Life is good, but it could get better. And we do have a problem with housing. We do have a problem with the stagnation of wages. And I would never at one point, say that young people today should just shut up and put up. I think there's a lot to be said, and there's a lot to be said for holding our political leaders accountable for the challenges that not only young people, but old people as well face. There is much of the battles that we face today, whether it be in relation to fewer jobs, less access to housing, is not actually solely afflicting young people. There's many, many older people who are dealing with that as well. So granny bashing, I think, which is what I'm going to call this, and I'm going to have no sympathy for anyone who tries to spin it in a more positive light, I think, is most crucially elitist, and it's lazy. It's denying the fact that millennials and people of my age who come out of university and generation renters who expect to waltz out of Oxbridge and into their first home and are absolutely astounded and disgusted that that can't happen. Well, welcome to the experience of most working class people in this country, baby boomers or otherwise. There is a deep kind of elitism at the heart of this discussion, I think. It's most often middle class, whinging millennials who put forward this argument and not the majority of young people, certainly not myself or people who I grew up with. And similarly, the stereotype of the baby boomers, of being rich and grasping, of being kind of, as Jeremy has said, kind of uncaring, thoughtless in their expenditure is untrue and I think, does a disservice to both generations. So I think really to sum up, this miserabilism, this miserly attitude to what we need from society and to politics, the kind of idea that you would blame the people sitting around your kitchen table rather than look outside the four walls of your house and change the world, argue for more housing, argue for more jobs, argue for more for everyone, show a bit of political solidarity, have respect for your elders, not in just a kind of symbolic way, but actually in an understanding that it takes everyone in a society to change rather than a simple generational debate. We've got a lot to learn from our elders, and we also have a lot of potential to use the aspirations and the political desires of young people in conjunction with everyone else in society to change the world, and I'm very positive about that. If we truly want to be radical as a generation, dangerously attempting to speak on behalf of everyone my age, we need to stop the griping, stop the whinging, get real about changing politics, and stop the blame game, start arguing for more. Thanks.